Welcome to some of the best mountain railroading to be found in the whole world. This is Tehachapi Pass in California during springtime in 2025. Enjoy this intro. It's March here on the Tehachapi, and this video will showcase the bottom to the top of the pass with almost every location in between. Here's a shot of the map showing the 34 miles crossing the Tehachapi Mountains, starting at Sandcut in the top left and ending in the town of Tehachapi itself on the bottom right. As you can see, it is full of twists and turns, and also home to the famous Tehachapi Loop, which gets a lot of attention in this production. This is Union Pacific's Mojave sub, and we are starting just south of Edison, California at the railroad location called Sandcut. BNSF 6740 is leading an eastbound intermodal train through the crossover at Sandcut back there in the distance. This line is owned by the Union Pacific, but BNSF has trackage rights here, and this video actually shows more BNSF trains than UP trains. It gets confusing because the UP designates this as a north-south running line, but the BNSF trains are considered running east-west from the Southern Transcon. For the sake of ease, I'll call out trains heading uphill or downhill, so this one is heading uphill. Drones do not record audio, but for some of this video I have added train audio to the drone footage with music mixed in as well. Subscribe and hit the bell if you're enjoying. In a surprise, we have a UP intermodal train coming down the hill on the other main track, about to meet the uphill BNSF intermodal train. This UP train led by UP 5303. The railroad location Bina is there in the distance near the rear of the UP train, which is where this section of double track mainline ends. My dad joined me on this trip, so you may see both of us here and there with the blue Ford that we rented for this time. Next, we're a few miles farther south, approaching the location named Ilmon along another section of double-track mainline with a downhill BNSF intermodal train led by BNSF 6657 exiting Caliente Canyon and following the creek of the same name. Part of what makes this some of the world's best mountain railroading is how steep the grade is, and here at Ilmon is where trains really start to dig into that grade heading south. This grade chart shows the whole mountain and beyond. What you will see in this video averages around 2.4% or more, and right in this area is quite steep, up to 2.9%. The steepness is evident in several different places throughout this video, as you will see. Now we're just a few miles farther south on the other end of Caliente Canyon along that same section of double-track mainline for an uphill BNSF intermodal train led by BNSF 4018 approaching the town of Caliente itself. Just a couple miles south is Caliente and a northbound UP manifest led by UP 5328 about to round the well-known Caliente horseshoe curve. We also get a look at some remnants of a derailment that had happened here about a week prior to this recording. The multiple focal lengths of the DJI Mavic 3 Pro drone can capture quite unique shots. I was very excited to bring it here to the Tehachapi. Next is another downhill train, this one a BNSF intermodal led by BNSF 7246 rounding the horseshoe curve. entering Caliente Canyon now, where we left the last uphill BNSF intermodal train. Now that grain train led by BNSF 6815 rounds the horseshoe and charges uphill. From here, we can see the railroad location known as Cliff way up above where there is currently another train passing through. It's about 6 rail miles from here down at Caliente to up there at Cliff. This is one of the neatest things about Tehachapi Pass in my opinion. Next is Tunnel 2, not even a mile from where we just were and around the corner from Tunnel 1. BNSF 4018 is leading its uphill intermodal train approaching the tunnel and another horseshoe curve. Tunnel 1 can be seen back there in the distance, and another section of double-track mainline begins here and ends up at Bealville, which you'll see soon. UP 5398 now leads a UP Manifest train downhill at Tunnel 2. Next is just a little over a mile up, with an uphill BNSF Manifest train rounding yet another horseshoe curve. It is approaching Bealville and being led by BNSF 6543. Another approaching Bealville from the other end is UP 5328 leading a manifest train and passing by the old abandoned Tunnel 4 on the other side of the train. It is about to make its way through Tunnel 3. This is another big curve seen from here at Bealville, showing the train on the other side of Tunnel 3 and also passing through Tunnel 5 up there in the background, as well as the railroad location Cliff, which we saw from way down low at Caliente. This is one of my favorite shots to get with the drone on Tehachapi. Now we're right up at Cliff and Tunnel 5 for an uphill BNSF manifest train led by BNSF 4604 during the sunset. Tunnel 5 can be known for quite the smoke show from uphill trains, and this definitely delivered, as well as spewing a bit of flames from the exhaust. The shot from the drone while still in the tunnel shows the flames a bit better. From here we can see Caliente way down low in the distance. How spectacular of a view. Now we see another BNSF manifest heading uphill, led by BNSF 6543 just around the corner from Tunnel 5, high above Tehachapi Creek down below. The line will follow Tehachapi Creek all the way to the top at the town of Tehachapi. From here we can again see Caliente way below with, I think, a couple of trains sitting and waiting for maintenance. I came here in March with hopes of getting the grass in a decently green state for early spring. I am very satisfied with the result, as it is quite green here throughout most of the video. The head end is just now making its way into Tunnel 7 in the distance. Tunnel 6 is also long gone like Tunnel 4, but I'm not quite sure where Tunnel 6 was. I think it's right in this area somewhere. Oh wow, there is some guy working up on the mountain here. That looks extremely dangerous. Is this where Tunnel 6 was, I wonder? Back at Tunnel 5 is BNSF 6815 leading its uphill grain train. Heading down again a bit, we're back at Tunnel 3 for a downhill UP intermodal train led by UP 8321 approaching Bealville. Next we're up the mountain a ways at Rowen and Rowen Siding, where another downhill UP intermodal train is passing an uphill BNSF manifest train. This one is being led by UP 8138 and the line is still following Tehachapi Creek. This is another spot of a previous recent derailment, and there was actually a couple of guys here working with big equipment cleaning it up. I'm not sure how long before this shot the derailment occurred. Both tunnels 7 and 8 are here in the shot. We saw the other side of tunnel 7 briefly back along cliff siding, so now this kind of brings that full circle for you. Just a few miles farther up is UP 5328 heading downhill with its manifest train approaching Rowen and passing the National Chavez Center facility in the middle of another horseshoe curve. high rail vehicle waits here in Rowen siding for this train to pass. Next is Woodford and Woodford sighting, which is just a couple miles up from Rowen with BNSF 4604, again grinding uphill with its manifest train. This is the same train we saw at Tunnel 5 spewing flames from the exhaust. Another along Woodford sighting is an uphill UP manifest train led by UP 6729. We get a quick look at the Keene water tower system as the train leaves us. Next is BNSF 5717 less than a mile up, leading a manifest train downhill, still following and passing over Tehachapi Creek. At a much higher elevation, we can see still a little dusting of snow at the tops of those mountains. approaching the famous Tehachapi Loop, and from here you can see where we just were at Woodford below. The first train to round the loop is an uphill BNSF intermodal led by BNSF 3873. The loop also includes S-curves on either side of it, which leads some to call it a double loop, but all in all makes for some wild potential with the drone. The train passes through the loop tunnel, which is Tunnel 9, and the switch at the previous Waylong siding, which is now a second main track to Marcel south of here. Here at the loop, it was a lot of fun using the 3 different focal lengths of the Mavic 3 Pro drone to capture some very unique angles. In some cases it will appear as if there are 2 or even 3 different trains in one shot due to using longer focal lengths of the multiple cameras. Here's what it looks like from the ground at the Tehachapi Loop overlook. Right after that, a BNSF track geometry inspection train made its way up and around the loop. Next is BNSF 3800 heading uphill as well, with a manifest and one of my favorite new angles of the loop. This section next to Tunnel 10 is where Waylong and Marcel sidings were combined to make a section of double-track mainline spanning almost 4 miles. The hill here next to the tunnel was blasted away so they could achieve this new double main track. Now BNSF 6695 pulls a downhill intermodal train around the loop in some fantastic morning light. Another spot here where the line crosses Tehachapi Creek. Next, climbing uphill at the loop is an empty grain train led by BNSF 6815 and more fantastic light at the end of the day. From this ground shot, you can see the head end of the train through the gaps of the cars. This next whole scene is my absolute favorite angle from the loop. Next, BNSF 4604 leads a manifest up the loop again with the lead and rear units about to pass over one another. favorite scene of the video is BNSF 6657 heading downhill with its intermodal train, again in 3 different places at this angle. This is about the only easy ground shot you can get from this side of the loop. Now BNSF 6543 leads an uphill manifest, which was the only train I saw that didn't quite pass over itself, as you will see. On the other main track, a downhill manifest was approaching, led by BNSF 6913. I captured something rather unique here. Watch as the rear DPU unit's intake and exhaust suck in and blow away the smoke from that unit on the downhill train. BNSF 6913 now takes its train down the loop. The final train we will see at the loop is BNSF 4018 heading uphill with its intermodal. A few miles farther up from the loop, we are approaching Cable and the section of 4 tunnels number 14 through 17. Rolling slowly out of tunnel 14 is an uphill BNSF manifest train led by BNSF 3800. Tunnels 11, 12, and 13 are all also long gone now, which is why we skipped from tunnel 10 to tunnel 14. This appears to be some canal for Tehachapi Creek. Pretty light flow right now. for the last scene of the video, UP6729 leads an uphill manifest approaching the outskirts of Tehachapi on another section of double-track mainline. This train was really digging into the grade here, which was music to the ears through this section. In less than a mile, this train will be in downtown Tehachapi, which I wished I had flown up high to get a view of, but didn't think to in the moment. The climb for the railroad is over 3,100 feet in elevation from around where we started to only a short distance more from our location here. There is more to see through the Tehachapi Mountains east of town, but I did not have enough time to capture any more during my duration out here. Just means I'll have to come back. If you enjoyed, then consider helping the channel out with a super thanks donation via the thanks button on the bottom of the video. It tremendously helps to bring you quality material like this, but please do not feel obligated to do so. Your viewership is all that I could hope for and means everything to me. What do you think? Is this possibly the best mountain railroading in the world? I hope you enjoyed, and thanks so much for watching.